Is Israel just a war-hungry country that is interested in starting wars everywhere they can, this time Syria? Or, as usual, are we not asking the right questions? Is this ceasefire good for Israel right now? Why are we defending the Druze in Syria? And how has Biden got a lot to do with this behind the scenes? All that and more in today's episode of the Meira K Show. If you were to watch the media today or for this last week, you would assume that Israel has just launched a massive attack on Syria because we are so bloodthirsty. We just love wars. That's all we want to do. And yes, every headline is indicating this, but no one is talking about what is going on behind the scenes. And that's exactly what we do here on the Meira K Show. We are trying to figure out why Israel would launch this attack. And to do that, it begins with not asking the question as to what is Israel doing, but rather, what is Julani doing? And if you're unfamiliar, Julani is this Al-Qaeda guy, okay? He's ex-Al-Qaeda, but we all know what that means in the Middle East. He is the person behind the toppling of the Assad regime a few months back, which Israel, of course, assisted in, and he now is in charge of Syria. Now, Syria is a really interesting country with a lot of different things going on, but it has a lot of minorities in the demographic. About 50% of Syria is made out of these different smaller groups, and one of these groups is the Druze. Now, the Druze are only about 3% of Syria, but the Druze, all in all, of a group are about 1 million people, and they are dispersed between Syria, Lebanon, and Israel mainly. They have some people in Jordan, but as a whole, they are a really interesting group that have kind of moved away from Islam. They have their own very interesting religion, and they are a huge part of the fabric of Israeli society. They live up north. They actually never left the north. During all of the attacks of Hezbollah, they've been attacked left, right, and center, and they've really been at the forefront of that. And they serve in our wars, they serve in our armies, and they are just part of our society. Interestingly enough, Israel gets such bad rep for hating on its minorities because of all of our conflict with the Palestinians. But the truth is, we love minority groups here, and we support them, and we get involved with them, and we are willing to do a lot to make sure that they're okay. And so in Syria, there's also this small Druze group. Now, this group is not exactly friends with Julani, okay? They don't like this new regime. They're not interested in it particularly, and they've made it pretty clear that they're not about to bow down to this facade that Julani has created. And why do I say facade? Well, because that's exactly what he has done. He has successfully made it seem by putting on a suit. Literally, you'll probably hear this a lot from pro-Israelis, this idea of terrorist in a suit. He's put on a suit, showed up at all these diplomatic meetings, and he's saying, hey, I have a new vision for Syria, one in which we are kind of, like everybody else, like every other Western country. But this, of course, is not the case. And Israel is highly aware of that, okay? Now, remember, Israel is about yay big. It's very, very small. And Syria is not that small. And Syria is right on our borders. And we have been preparing, and we've discussed this, for a potential attack and infiltration from Syria. Now, you might have heard of Suwaida at this point, right? It's the small location on our border where the Druze are mainly centered. Okay, they mainly live there, and it's right in between. It's almost like a buffer zone between Israel and Syria, and the Druze are mainly located there. So over the last few weeks, we've seen, like, last few days, really, it's been kind of this weird escalation, right? It started with apparently Bedouins attacking a Druze truck of vegetables, and then Druze kidnapping, and then Bedouins kidnapping, and then blah, blah, blah. It escalated into a full-out war where the Druze were really, really, really being attacked pretty brutally. And then Julani, who apparently is not behind this attack whatsoever, when I say he's not behind the attack, I hope you understand what I'm talking about. Although we can't prove it for a fact, it's unlikely that the Bedouins are acting without his agreement, okay? Julani decides that he's going to send people down to try and help calm the area. Okay, and as he does that, Israel says, hey, wait a second. We are coming out in defense. And they send aid into the Druze locations to help. They send their military, right? They start bombing in Damascus, which is interesting. You may have seen the video, right, of a reporter, everything exploding around her, and they hit Damascus, which has nothing to do with Suwaid, right? You're trying to figure out why that is, and it's a direct message to Julani, but we'll get to that in a second. And they try and intervene, and a ceasefire is announced, and the Bedouins and the Druze keep on fighting, and then another ceasefire is announced, blah, 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 and it doesn't work, and it pulls out, and then finally, over Shabbat, we hear that Trump and Turkey have managed to broker a successful ceasefire between, is it the Druze or the Bedouins, or Israel or Syria, depending on how you see it. And for now, there's a little bit of kind of quiet. However, in the meanwhile, the Druze have been really massacred in a terrible, terrible, terrible way. You might have seen the videos of the moustaches being shaved off. What is this? Well, the moustache is a very symbolic religious statement for the Druze. And it's a kind of a hint or a suggestion or a very intense proclamation of degradation to the Druze people. You might have heard about the hospital that was massacred, right? Literally young Druze civilians of Syria working in a hospital. The people came in, they killed them. There are lots and lots of people killed, and the Druze people begged of Israel to kind of help. Okay, so if you're confused, that makes sense because a lot has happened. And at the basis of all this is the question why Israel is intervening in what seems to be another war, right? We have enough going on. We've still got Iran on our backs, although we hope that there's somewhat kind of calmed down for a little bit. We've got Hamas with big things happening there. We're seeing internal uprisings and we're waiting on this deal, but we discussed that in depth last episode why that's not happening just for now. We've got Lebanon and Hezbollah who apparently are rearming, and although Lebanon's trying to come after the banks of Hezbollah and kind of stop them financially, Hezbollah are still managing to grow. We've got maybe Jordan, we've got maybe Egypt. We have so much going on. Why are we intervening in Syria? So to begin with, there's the kind of very simple answer, which is the Druze are part of our society. Their brothers are on the line. They're in Syria being hurt, and we are going to go out and help them. Okay? And this is one of the two main reasons that's been given. It's kind of this act of solidarity. The Druze people, part of our society, have begged of Bibi Netanyahu to send people out to their help. And that's what we're doing. We're sending them aid. We're trying to help. But obviously, there is more to the story. And the more to the story, if you look at it from a very cynical perspective, could be, yes, that we're so bloodthirsty, we're just interested in going in and starting more wars. But again, it's way more focused on what Julani has got going on. So we all know that there's been discussions for a peace deal. And if you look at it kind of on the surface level, it's like, why is Israel sabotaging? There was a conversation, Trump just removed the sanctions for Julani and we were moving towards peace deal and it seemed like things were kind of working. And when we went in and really took away the powerful military tools that Assad had built out when Julani came into control, Julani kind of accepted that and said it was okay. So it looked like everything was fine. It looked like we were moving towards peace. Why is Israel starting this war again? But then we have to start asking the question, well, if you take Israel out of the picture for a second, Julani has everything to lose from this kind of attack. Okay, he's got Trump on his side, so to speak. He's got the sanctions removed from Syria. Apparently, he's succeeding in creating this facade. Why? Why is he allowing for this sort of attack to happen with Druze? Why is he, although he's pretending he isn't, sending people in to attack the minorities? And it seems to be, and I know, I'm sure you'll be very, very surprised to hear that Al-Qaeda terrorist in a suit might not be always as honest, as transparent as we want. But it seems to be that whilst he's kind of creating this big facade publicly to the world of, look, we're so peaceful, Syria is kind of creating this new amazing reality, maybe potentially he's doing something a little bit different. And maybe the fact that most of the minority groups in Syria really don't like Julani and are not for this new regime, that could be an indicator. And maybe, just maybe, he is testing the waters. Now, he's come out saying he's not anti-Israel, he doesn't want a war with Israel, but at the same time, whilst he may not have anticipated that Israel would attack, going after the Druze, which is just on our border, is very much something that Israel has to be careful of. Why? Because we learned some stuff on October 7th. And we've spoken about this, the idea of deterrence, the idea that we've moved away from, okay, there's terrorists on our borders, but hopefully they aren't interested in attacking us, and into, can they attack us? And if they can attack us, that's something that we have to deal with. And when we saw how quickly the border of Syria started to escalate in what turned out to be a very, very intense and quick massacre, the understanding is that their ability to come to Israel is very, very, very quick. Okay, and that means our border with Syria is in danger. And that means Julani needs to receive a very strong message that we are not interested whatsoever in allowing for escalations that can impact Israel. Is Israel stepping outside of its right and jurisdiction by going to fight another war? Well, I would say that's not what we're doing. We're not fighting the war for the Druze. That's reason number one that's been given. What we're doing is securing our borders at all costs. And to do that, we have to secure this kind of buffer zone. And that means that the first line of defense, the Druze, who are there and who are the enemies of Julani in many ways because Julani doesn't like them, if they are so quickly being attacked at a time which is so crucial, right, for Julani to be making a peace deal with America and to be creating this illusion of peace, then the cracks in the armors are going to appear much quicker than Israel expected. That is the real reason that we're doing this. We are not believing in Julani's facade. We're just not believing that he is a super peaceful person who went to Al-Qaeda, but now he's almost a priest. He is just so interested in making peace. He is not. And he's promised to the world that he's going to unite the minorities, but secretly he's attacking them, which means that the next part of his lie, the lies about being peaceful with Israel, are also on the fence. Keep in mind that we have to add another factor into this, which is Turkey. So if you look at the map, you've got Israel and you've got Lebanon, you've got a little bit of Syria on the border, and then you've got Turkey. Now, Turkey hates Israel. We know Erdogan hates Israel. It's funny because Israelis love going to Turkey. They love getting their hair done and they're going there on holiday and shopping. And Turkey's a beautiful country and we have had a good friendship with them over the years. But Erdogan has made it very clear since the Gaza war that him and Israel, we are no longer friends. And he went out in a speech yesterday. He didn't declare war on Israel exactly, but it was very close to that. And he said, we'll have no problem defending Syria. If Turkey, who are growing their influence in Syria, and they are doing so, they have become proper allies of Julani over the last few months, that means that if Israel doesn't provide a strong message to the Middle East that you cannot mess with Israel's borders, Turkey infiltrating to Israel through Syria is not as far-fetched as you would imagine. Because again, if Julani is saying one thing to the world to create priests, but is quietly doing other things, like attacking minorities that disagree with his religion, Israel knows that potentially the next step is them coming for us. And that is something that we are just utterly uninterested in. And why does this make me so happy? Well, we've spoken a lot about the shifting geopolitical dynamics here in Israel. And they're complicated. They're complicated in the United States. We've gone from the Biden administration to the Trump administration, where we've seen ups and downs. And now we have this but we have this amazing relationship between Trump and Netanyahu. But we also see that Trump is very quick to say to Bibi, like, back off. And I love this because Bibi, who knows that Trump probably isn't super excited about the idea of us joining into what is another war, wouldn't have promoted or wouldn't have been so for the idea of us attacking. And still Netanyahu is saying, because he's, again, the best leader we could have for Israel during this war, he is coming out and saying it doesn't matter if there's a potential peace deal. This idea of peace is something that doesn't actually work. Okay, the peace for the sake of peace doesn't make any sense anymore in this terrain. We had peace with Hamas. We had a ceasefire, and you've probably heard that argument a lot. But we did. We weren't at war with them. They were firing rockets at us every now and then, and nothing was really going on, and then they attacked us. This idea of peace for peace, we're done with it. We're only doing peace for strength. So number one, I see that Bibi's putting Israel's safety more as a priority than our diplomatic relationships, which I absolutely love. But number two, he is really pushing for this peace through strength. Bibi Netanyahu is proving this to the world, and this is something that we're seeing more and more. Okay, so a really interesting tweet that came out this week, which has a lot to do with Syria, is this image, okay, that Netanyahu actually posted, and which shows how the Biden administration was really funding the attempt to remove Netanyahu from power. Now, there's a lot of legislation. You can't really say things, and blue and white aren't happy with this, etc. But it's pretty much been proved at this point that there was a serious attempt from that administration to try and remove Netanyahu. And why is this? Because Netanyahu is really strong. And the left in Israel know this. The left in Israel know this so much that they are willing to do absolutely almost anything to remove this man who has proven to be nothing but a very strong and capable leader for Israel. They'll do everything to get him down. And you might have heard at the moment that there's this whole hullabaloo going on in the Israeli government with the ultra-Orthodox pulling out potentially and maybe bringing down the government. And yes, whilst there is some form of truth in that, it's once again the left-wing attempt to bring down Netanyahu. Now, that might seem like an extreme statement, but there is a lot of truth in it. Netanyahu has a government, and the way the coalition in Israel works is that it has to have at least a majority, which means if you have 120 seats in the government, 61 need to be committed to the coalition so that you can pass laws and always have the numbers that you need to move things forward, okay? The government was currently sitting at about 68, and the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, have been pushing for a while, saying we need a resolution for the draft law. Now, the draft law is incredibly complicated because the country was set up in a way where there was an understanding that because this is a biblical country and this is a religious country, and also with the destruction of the Jewish community after October 7th, there was a real imperative need to rebuild the Torah Torah of Israel, okay? The studying, the religion here. And so there was an exemption given to a small group of ultra-Orthodox Jews who basically said, we're going to sit down and we're going to study Torah for as much as we can and rebuild its institutions. And this is our way of defending the land. Make no mistake, culturally, the ultra-Orthodox here in Israel believe that by studying and by committing to Torah and committing to God, they're keeping the country safe just as much as the IDF. Now, you may agree or disagree with it, and I'll tell you who really disagrees with it, kind of the middle group, the Dati Leumi group, the group that does both Torah and the army, right? They really disagree with this notion, but this is the belief. And it's a cultural belief, and we can get into the ins and outs of it a million times over, but we're not going to. And so they have this thing where they think that they should not be serving in the army. They're not a Zionist group, particularly more and more of them are becoming Zionists, but they're not really Zionists. They believe just in the Torah and in God, and that being their direct relationship. And they receive a lot of benefits from the government because they're actually normally quite a poor group because they spend all day studying and learning, and they only have one income, if that. And they have lots of children, okay? And because they have lots of children, they are growing. They are growing and they are growing and they are growing, and they do not really serve in the army. Now, when I say they do not, there's a caveat. There's a small group within this group that does go to the army. Now, when I say they do not, there's a caveat. There is a small group, and that group is growing every single day that does serve, okay? But as this war has gone on, and as we are feeling more and more exhaustion, and as the soldiers need some time off, there's kind of been this ongoing narrative in the media and across the population, which is, why don't the ultra-Orthodox serve? Now, the real reason the ultra-Orthodox don't serve is because it is not their value, and they really believe that to keep the Jewish people safe, they need to be studying, okay? Again, we're not getting into the ins and outs of that right now, but there is a need, so to speak, for more manpower. And there is a need to figure out how, if you have a demographic that is growing and growing and growing in numbers, they're having 10 children, 15 children each, and they're not serving in the army, and you have a secular demographic that does, it's having 1 or 2 or 3 children, they're going to grow and grow and grow, and we're going to need their numbers. And so there's this big ongoing conversation about what to do, and the left in Israel has dominated this, not with solutions, okay, not with real questions of how we integrate and change the culture and help educate and kind of create bridges between the gaps in society, because there's such hatred and there's such a dissonance between the groups. But rather, they've been focused politically on how this group, they just take from Israel, they take from Israel, they take from Israel, and they don't ever give everything back, and they have to, and the army needs it, and we need it, and how come they aren't contributing? How come they aren't contributing? Now, it's my belief that there is a solution, and there is a long-term solution that needs to be built out. But the way to do it is definitely not by making this political. Over the last few months, we've seen the Supreme Court intervene, and of course the Attorney General intervene, and they've come up with more and more and more draconian rules against this group, against the ultra-Orthodox, to penalize them for not drafting. Why do I say that I believe that the left is behind this? Well, because if you understand the way the demographic and the coalitions work, you've got Netanyahu, who tends to get about 30 to 40 seats, depending on the year, and you've got all these other smaller groups. You've got the more extreme right-wing groups like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, which you've probably heard of. You've got Arab groups, you've got more left groups, more center groups, and you've got the Haredi groups. Now, the reality is as such that Netanyahu cannot create a coalition. Well, actually not Netanyahu. No group can create a coalition if you exempt from the coalition Bibi, the Haredim, and this extreme right, and the Arabs, okay? Which is kind of the narrative that the left goes with. Oh, we don't want to sit with these people, and we're not going to sit with these people. The numbers just don't add up. If this group is about 30, and this group's about 20, and this group's about 10, already there you're at 60, right? And this group's about 5, and this group's about 7. So the numbers don't add up. And so it is my belief that the Haredim have always tended to sit, well, not always, but they often tend to sit with Netanyahu because Netanyahu has a very center to right government. He's not extreme right in any way, but he's center to right. And there is one group that the right in Netanyahu's government actually hate more than the left, okay? And this has been created again over the years, and that is the ultra-Orthodox. The right wing in Israel is so committed to defending this country and moving forward and trying to do everything in their power to really kind of create a safe Israel, that they look at the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, as a group that just tries, like, as parasites that take from them. And that was, in my opinion, carefully curated by the left in the media. Why? Because at the end of the day, the Haredim have one thing that they are just not willing to give up on. They are not willing to compromise on their religious beliefs. They're just not. They're not going to compromise on their belief that learning Torah keeps the Jewish people safe, that Israel needs to stay somewhat religious. They're just not going to compromise on it. And by the way, Netanyahu understands this, okay? A lot of people in government understand that a big part of the Haredi world is actually really, really legit. It's not extreme, it's not horrible, it's not anti. There are groups within the ultra-Orthodox which are very extreme and very not okay, okay? I have nothing to say about that. And by the way, I grew up ultra-Orthodox and I left the system, so I don't agree with them completely, but I do understand them a little bit. And so what the left has been trying to do is to say, look, Netanyahu has this strong government and we're going to try and get rid of him, dominate him through these bring them homes campaigns, and by creating this massive media narrative and take on him. Why? Because they know that Netanyahu is stronger than them. They're not going to manage to keep up this facade that they have of running the country. They're not going to manage to keep up the running of the country in and of itself if they have somebody like Netanyahu coming against them. He is a very, very strong leader. And that is a problem. That is why they focus so much hate on him. But if they can't make it happen from outside, if they can't do it externally, they're going to do it internally, which is why they've been putting so much pressure to try and make a reality in which the Haredim have to pull out of the government. Okay? And I really, truly believe this because I think that I have seen from the beginning of the war, the Haredim have done everything and they've been called selfish, etc., to try and stay within the government to some degree. They've tried. And now there was this secret meeting with this guy who came up with resolution. And some of these resolutions included like biometric tracking of, it was really, really extreme. And the idea was that the Haredim basically said, you know what, we can't sit in a government, we can't stay in a situation where our people are going to be penalized to the level that they are. And we're talking about not being allowed, not getting budgets, not being allowed to travel, not being allowed to drive, blockades at the entrance to their communities, mass arrests, right? It was getting really, really extreme, the resolutions that the other side was bringing. And so the Haredim said, we're going to pull out of the government, but we're not exactly going to bring the government down. And this is something that so many of the headlines have just forgotten to say, okay? They're pulling out of the coalition to create pressure on Netanyahu and on the center, the Likud, to come up with some sort of resolution in which allows, yes, a slow drafting of more Haredim, because there's an understanding that needs to happen, but also at the same time, not this draconian, extreme way of forcing all of the ultra-Orthodox into the army in a way that doesn't work. Just by the way, the army doesn't want them. It would never make any sense, this whole system. It's all done to bring apart Netanyahu's government. That is my belief. Because if the Haredim have to pull out, then Netanyahu's government fall. But the Haredim actually did something pretty intelligent. They pulled out of the coalition, but they did not push forward a resolution to dissolute the government, meaning to dissolve the government. Meaning that whilst the government's going to be stagnant, and this isn't a great thing for a government during a war, in fact, it's a very bad thing for a government during a war, it's not sending the government into re-elections, which is a positive thing because we don't want elections right now. And now that summer is coming, okay, now that we're about to hit kind of the time where the laws are stopped and paused, we're going to see that we at least have a government for a few more months up until after Sukkot, up until the fall. Okay, and why do I say all this? Because we're actually here to talk about Syria. That was just a caveat, a jump off, because all of these are ways that in which Netanyahu's philosophy of peace through strength are trying to be attacked, and he is successfully standing up time and time again against his enemies, against the left, against externals, against everything going on, and saying, we learned our lesson on October 7th. We are calling you out. He's calling out the deep state. Huckabee shows up with a Bugs Bunny, which was hilarious, to his trials. He's calling them out, and he's standing stronger and stronger every day, no matter how much he is hated, to say, once again, peace through strength. And that doesn't mean peace just for peace. It means strength. It means we need a country in which everybody understands the leadership means business. Our government was democratically elected in. Even if you don't like it, even if you're part of the left that thinks that Netanyahu is the worst thing that ever happened, and they use the media every single day to try and bring him down, and they use internal tactics to try and bring the Haredim down. By the way, the tactics used during this entire thing were very dirty. We're not even getting into that. But the Haredim were really left with no other choice but to pull out to some degree. And again, they didn't bring down the government. And you see this externally, the world calling out Netanyahu for being the worst thing, the biggest dictator. But at the end of the day, they forget. He was elected. He was elected by the people, and the majority of the people in this country love him and don't always agree with everything that he does, but support him. And they see the reality for what it is, that Bibi Netanyahu is managing to show the world time and time again what a strong leadership looks like. And so that, my friends, is what's going on, not just here internally, but also externally with Syria. We've got not Israel starting a war again because they are just interested in making our soldiers even more exhausted and just creating conflicts for no reason, but rather to send a very clear and strong message across the board to everybody who is contemplating maybe even some sort of escalation that could in some way impact and hurt Israel, that that is not happening again. We have learned, and even if that comes at the threat of peace deals, which Israel has famously and historically been way too quick to run after, right? And has given up pieces of our land for the sake of peace. That time, hopefully, my friends, is somewhat behind us. We're just not doing that anymore. And yes, it was done as an act of solidarity to the Druze. And yes, of course, they are important and we support them. More than that, it was done as an act of security for our borders. And I am for that. Now, do I think that we need to stay there and be involved in this conflict and be part of an escalation? Well, if Turkey get involved and if we're actually seeing a threat of an invasion from Turkey because they have a very capable army, then yes, Israel must absolutely go up to the borders of Syria, etc. But for now, I think that a ceasefire is not the worst thing in the whole world, but it has to come with a caveat that all of our ceasefires have come with. Look, we'll pull out, we'll watch, and we are watching all of the time, and we are going to make sure that if there is any sort of change at all, we go in and we attack the military abilities that are starting to uprise and could potentially be a threat. We are up against so many fronts. There's so much going on in so many different directions. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to this. Israel is going to do everything that it can to make sure that we are safe and secure. And we are watching all of the people, even the people that pretend to be our allies, even the people that pretend to be our friends, even the Julanis of the world who are going out saying, hey, we're going to bring a peace deal with Israel. We're so excited. Netanyahu is saying, a peace deal doesn't mean much to me if the next day you're going to break the peace deal and infiltrate into my country. I'm not interested in that. I am putting that secondary. If you want a peace deal, then you actually have to show us that you are worthy of a peace deal. And that demands that you step up. Don't go after the minorities in your country, definitely not the minorities that are on our border and that make us endangered. And at the end of the day, that is our goal as the Israeli state. We are tiny and we are surrounded by a huge amount of enemies. And we can only win if psychologically and militarily we prove that we are really, really strong and capable. And we aren't just looking for diplomatic resolutions left, right, and center. So much so that we are willing to even potentially endanger a relationship with the United States. But again, the message comes back to the same message and the same narrative time and time again. Would we like peace? Yes. Would it be ideal? Yes. But peace is only going to come through strength. Peace is not going to come through us just giving in and caving in and letting our borders become destabilized again. Under no circumstances, that is not what's going on. And so, my friends, that was a long and convoluted way to say that this war is not ending anytime soon. I wish I could say that we are wrapping up and that it is coming to an end. But every day, new things arise. Every day, new diplomatic things change. And the geopolitical situation here is so precarious and dangerous. And Israel once again and Netanyahu once again prove themselves to be thinking way bigger. We don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes, and there may be much more to this attack than is being presented on the media as Israel going after Julani once again because they want to create more wars. There's more going on behind the scenes. There always is, and we have to trust in that. Trust that the media representation is always inaccurate, and that is what we do on here. If you're watching this show, if you're still here, the Meira K Show is not just a podcast in which we talk about stuff. We are creating a revolution in which we fight back against the media manipulation, a revolution in which we stand up strong and proud and educated and informed as to what is really happening. A revolution in which we don't just take what we see as it is on face value. We deep dive and try and understand more. Whilst the whole world is looking at Israel and going, oh, bloodthirsty, we're asking ourselves, why is it that Julani is so interested in upturning a potential peace deal that's right around the corner? Is it because his military, his terrorist background is just there and he can't hide it? And why is it that Biden was funding the Israel protests? Why was Biden trying to get rid of Bibi so badly? What was he afraid of? And the truth is, they're afraid of a group of Jews who can think for themselves and stand up proud. And that is exactly what we are going to do. And that is exactly what we are becoming every single day. And if we need to have patience to get there, if we need to hold our breath and get through another escalation in another location and handle more sirens from Yemen or more sirens from Iran or whatever it is that we have to deal with, we are going to do it, because at the end of the day, I have a child, and my child is going to grow up in a safe Israel, hopefully. And we have God on our side, and it has been proven since the beginning of this war that God really is here with us every single step of the day. And so with that packed episode, I'm Meira, and I will see you next time.